Joining me now, Max Boot, Washington Post columnist, National Security Senior Fellow on the Council of Foreign Relations, and author of Reagan, His Life and Legend. And Helene Cooper, New York Times Pentagon correspondent and an MSNBC political contributor. Thank you both very much for coming to the Sunday show. So, Helene, tell us, how is the pick of Pete Hegseth to run the Pentagon going over at the Pentagon?
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me. And hi, Max. I walked into the Pentagon on the morning after President-elect Trump announced his shot pick for Secretary of Defense, and that's all anybody was talking about. To say that people were horrified, I think would be an understatement. There was real horror expressed. Put aside all that you just described about Pete Hegseth, about the sexual assault accusation. Put aside the calling for the removal of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, wanting to get rid of all the so-called woke generals. There's just the simple. Let's put all of that aside for a second and just look at the simple matter of experience. The Pentagon is an $849 billion a year enterprise. We're looking at almost $1 trillion budget. It's got 1.3 million active duty American troops. And when you add the civilians who work for the Defense Department and then the National Guard, you're looking at 3 million employees. This is far and away a bigger type of operation than many countries. And we've got 750, what is that? 750 military bases around the world. We're not talking about a small little like organization. You're talking about a massive bureaucracy with defense contracts to manage, acquisition contracts to manage, and this whole idea of the looming great power war that's sort of coming down the road with Russia and China. And to turn around and to give this kind of an institution, to hand this over to a television news anchor who was an Army, he was an Army national, he was in the Army National Guard. He instructed Special Forces units at one point. He did instruction. He has deployment overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's unclear if he actually fought, but there are combat patches. But somebody who has no management experience, no real management experience, no command experience in the military, and to hand over this kind of an institution is just looks to anybody who actually studies the Pentagon like a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm. Now, Max has continued this part of the conversation because you wrote a column in the Washington Post with the headline, "Why Trump's Hegseth's nomination for defense is a danger to the U.S. military." And we'll read this quote that's on the screen. "Giving MAGA ideologues a license to remove senior military officers would set an awful precedent that would endanger the military's identity as an apolitical professional fighting force that owes its loyalty not to any individual, but to the Constitution. It is, in fact, not hard to imagine Hegseth firing the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff, thereby precipitating the biggest crisis in civil military relations in U.S. history." And I don't think you're even underestimating just how bad this pick is.
It's shockingly bad, Jonathan. I mean, if I had read in The Onion that these were the people that Trump was picking, I would think it was just a joke. But this is reality. I mean, how can anybody imagine that, Tulsi Gabbard is qualified to be DNI, or Matt Gaetz is qualified to be AG, or in this case, that Pete Hegseth is qualified to be Secretary of Defense. And as Helene was pointing out, he has no management experience whatsoever that would give anyone any confidence that he could run an institution with nearly 3 million employees. But beyond that, he is a MAGA ideologue. And just a couple of weeks ago, he talked about his desire to fire General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it's not clear why, except that General Brown is an African American who made a video a few years ago about the racism he experienced during his rise through the ranks. And so he alienated a lot of folks in MAGA world. But it would be unprecedented to fire a chairman of the Joint Chiefs as part of a political vendetta, much less to fire other senior generals, which also appears to be in the offing. This is a massive challenge to the independence and integrity of our armed forces. And you have to wonder why President-elect Trump is intent on doing this. I think part of it is revenge on generals who disagreed with him during his first term. But part of it, I think, is also a strategy to gain control of what in other countries we would call a power ministry, to gain control of the armed forces so that he can use them for his own purposes. And I think that is extremely troubling and alarming.
Helene, you cover the Pentagon. I'm wondering if you've heard from any of your sources reaction to NBC's reporting that dropped yesterday during my show that the Trump transition is compiling lists of names of current and former military officers who were involved in the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and possibly bringing them up on, well, one, to court-martial them, and then possibly bringing treason charges against some of them.
That's one iteration of what we've been hearing out of Trump world for quite some time. There's also the earlier story that they were drawing up a list of anybody who had anything to do with General Mark Milley, who is hated by the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's hated by President-elect Trump. There have been other stories as well that they're drawing up lists of, various different military officials to fire as well. Anybody, for instance, who's at all connected with so-called woke policies, affirmative action, diversity, equity, and inclusion, anything like that. Good luck. I've heard a lot of, I spoke to several people yesterday about this, as well as earlier in the week about this idea of Trump coming into power and then drawing up lists and firing a whole bunch of people. I think that's easier said than done, particularly on when you look at the Afghanistan evacuation. Don't forget, it was former President Trump who came to the agreement with the Taliban to begin the Afghanistan evacuation to begin with. This isn't something when President Biden came into office, he pushed that back. But Trump wanted troops out of Afghanistan in December of 2020. It was 2021, 2022 before we saw 2021 before we actually saw this Afghanistan evacuation take place. But this isn't something that with any kind of credibility that President-elect Trump can stand there and say that he was opposed to. He may have been opposed to the the dreadful manner in which it took place, but he started this to begin with. So it's a hard one for me to get my head around how they would be able to prosecute something like this in court.
Okay, I'm going to make heads explode in the control room, but Max, I can't let you go without asking you to just listen to what House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said today on Meet the Press when asked whether he thought Tulsi Gabbard was a Russian asset. Listen to this, and we'll talk about it real quick on the other side.
Leader Jeffries, you're not willing to say she's a Russian asset.
No, that's not how I would characterize her at this particular juncture, but okay. I'm open to scrutinizing whatever information is presented to all of us. Listen, at the end of the day, we have to stop the brinksmanship, stop the partisanship, stop the bickering and the backbiting.
Real quick, Max, what do you make of that?
Well, what I make of it is that Tulsi Gabbard is absolutely the wrong person to lead DNI. And, I don't know what her connection is to Russia, but there's no question that she has a weird affection for Vladimir Putin, just as she has a weird affection for Bashar Assad. And so, in that job, you have to put American security first and not believe the crackpot conspiracy theories spread by dictators. And yet that is exactly what Gabbard does, for example, by repeating these crazy theories about supposed bioweapons labs in Ukraine, which was something spread by Russian propaganda. We need somebody who can tell reality from propaganda. And Tulsi Gabbard, based on her record, is not that person. So she should not be DNI any more than Pete Hegseth should be Secretary of Defense.
And with that, we're going to have to leave it there. Max Boot, Helene Cooper, thank you both very much, as always, for coming to this Sunday show.